welcome back from break. Hopefully you were able to get up and have a quick stretch. We are headed into a portion of the day that we would like to keep as routine. We've had this routine in the past where Nell continues to come and bring us answers to our questions that are our burning questions that we experience day to day, and also bring us the most relevant research that helps us to answer those questions. So I'm going to introduce Dr. Nell Duke. And we are so fortunate to have her that she makes the time out for us during these quarterly times, and that we are able to learn directly with her. She is the executive director for the Center for Early Literacy Success. She's considered one of the world's foremost experts in early literacy education. Her career has been focused on the right to literacy, particularly the ways in which early childhood, birth through age 8, education can set children on a path to literacy proficiency. Early in her career, Nell interwove experiences teaching and pursuing degrees, eventually earning a master's and a doctorate in human development and psych, with a concentration in language and literacy at the Harvard University Graduate School of Education. For 24 years, Nell served as a professor of education and psychology, first at Michigan State University and then at the University of Michigan. Her research focused largely on how to support young children in learning to read and write informational texts. Her teaching, writing, professional development, and work with policymakers aim to bridge gaps between research and practice in early literacy education. In 2018, Nell was awarded the International Literacy Association's highest honor, the William S. Gray Citation of Merit, for outstanding contributions to literacy research, theory, policy, and practice. She has been named one of the most influential education scholars in the U.S. in EdWeek, and has been involved in a wide range of initiatives designed to reshape literacy education. She has worked with many U.S. states to improve literacy instruction, for example, through the Council on Chief State School Officers, and has served as a long-term advisor for the District of Columbia Public Schools, which had the highest growth in the nation in fourth grade reading on NAEP in the decade prior to the pandemic. Nell is thrilled and humbled to join the team at Stand for Children as they work toward educational equity and justice, including in early literacy. With generous private donations, the Center for Early Literacy Success at Stand works with schools and early childhood education settings to provide a research-aligned and equitable early literacy education. Nell maintains a partial appointment at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where she was born and raised. She lives in Ann Arbor with her husband and her teenage son, and always enjoys her daughter's visits home as well. Please join me in welcoming Nell today to do that Q&A with us. Welcome, Nell.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you all and be back with you for another school year. As always, my job is to, or almost always, my job is to address questions that you all have posed. And so I'm going to share screen and get us started on that process. Sorry, very slow today. Okay. Thank you for lots of great questions as always. And in the tradition of these Q&As, these are informal responses, not prettied up slides. That's the agreement that allows me to actually have time to do this. So forgive me that the slides are not particularly beautiful. There are a number of questions asked this time that relate to questions that have been asked in the past. So it may be worthwhile at some point to just pop back through some of the old Q&As on some of these. And just a note that I think you know this, but I don't address questions that I feel like I'm not the right person to address. So there were some questions about upper elementary, which I appreciate, in middle school. But that's not my area of expertise. My expertise is birth to age 8. So I just like to stick in that area. There was a question about a document I didn't write, things like that. So I just selected some of the questions to address that I felt I was better positioned to address, and we don't have time to do all of them anyway. Okay, without further ado, the first question I want to address today is this one. Go ahead and read it on your slide. So the first thing I want to do is just highlight this part in yellow here and just, you know, I understand what the questioner was asking, but just to remind us all that we don't really want to talk about kids having reading difficulties when they're 4 and 5 years old, right? Because they're not, that's too early to say kids have reading difficulties. So what we would say is that this is screening children who are at risk for reading difficulties, or screening children to see whether they're at risk for reading difficulties. So just want to make that important point. Okay, so we can answer this question actually by looking at the legislation, which, as I understand from the agenda, you did maybe a little bit of already today, or made reference to it. So here's what the new legislation calls for. It calls for a screening assessment that must include, as appropriate for grade level or age as determined by the department, in alignment with the guidance described in subsections 2 and 4. Elements designed to identify difficulties in learning to decode and recognize words, including at least all of the following. So here are all the things a screener needs to have: phonemic awareness, RAN, which is rapid automatized naming, letter sound correspondence, single word reading, nonsense word reading, oral reading passage fluency. And then it says it may include, depending on the grade level and age, looking for comprehension difficulties using at least all of the following: a retelling, closed reading procedure, and answering questions about a reading passage. So to answer the question, the PASS assessment wouldn't meet the requirements of the legislation. And DIBELS without rapid automatized naming would also not meet the requirements. So what you'll need is versions of assessments that have all of these components in them. So that is the answer to that one. And I just have a few notes I want to share here. I just want to remind you all, I know you know this, but what a screener is and is not for. So a screener is a quick assessment that has a high false positive rate, meaning it errs on the side of over-identifying, to just do a first pass to help us figure out who we need to assess further. So that's what a screener does. Very important, we have screeners in medicine and public health, and we have screeners in education. A screener is not for telling you what to teach next. It doesn't have that. It's not for diagnosing. We need further assessment to diagnose. So it's just a first cut, first pass, okay? So a few things I want to make sure you remember as you embark on either if you already have a screener, you're continuing to work with screeners, or if you're adding a screener. Just because a screener assesses phonemic awareness in isolation from letters doesn't mean you should teach phonemic awareness in isolation from letters. This is something we've been saying for years, but feel like worth saying it again. The research is very clear that phonemic awareness instruction is most effective, not when it's done in isolation, but when it's done with letters. That's something that a recent meta-analysis confirmed, and the National Reading Panel said it in 2000, and all along the way in between. So please be careful about that. Also, a lot of screeners will have, and the a lot of screeners will have, and the legislation requires that screeners have children reading nonsense words. The correct term is actually pseudo words. Pseudo words are words that are spelled plausibly in English, like the way that you would expect them, a word to be constructed in English, but it isn't actually a real word. Anyway, there's a requirement for there to be a pseudo word reading component of the screener, and that's a common component of screeners, no problem there. But it doesn't mean you should be teaching kids to read pseudo words. So it shouldn't be the case that you respond to the screener, or the teachers that you're working with as a coach respond to the screener by now drilling kids or working with kids on pseudo word reading. That shouldn't be the focus of instruction, and that's pretty widely agreed. There is a little dispute in the field, but it's pretty widely agreed, and I think everyone does agree that we don't have clear research support at this point for working on that. So you're working on, decoding, and you're going to work on a range of words, including words that will not be familiar to kids, like pal or dud or whatever, but you're not going to sit there and just work on having them read nonsense words or pseudo words. Okay, also, just because the screener isn't going to have language or comprehension development on it at all age and grade levels doesn't mean that we should use the screener as a reason to neglect language or comprehension development. Everybody in the field who is knowledgeable in the area of literacy development agrees that language and comprehension development should be part of our focus in pre-kindergarten through third grade. So if you're getting that messaging from anyone, that's just not a correct interpretation of the intent of the legislation, nor of the intent of screeners. The legislation repeatedly calls for evidence-based practices. So you should be using research-supported practices that hopefully you've been learning about for many years. This legislation does not require any invention of new practices. So if somebody's coming to you with new practices they've invented to address the legislation, they're off base. All right, that's that question. The next question I want to address, because it follows so beautifully from the question we just had, is what does research say best supports are for a dyslexic reader? And this is an area we've had presentations on. I think, as you've already heard this morning, you kind of walked through some of the history there, and I know you'll continue to have many. Obviously, that's a big question to respond to in this brief time that I have with you. But I did want to draw your attention to just one example of a place you can look around this. This is a study I cite quite often that is a really nice systematic review and meta-analysis of research on reading intervention for children who have dyslexia or are at risk for dyslexia. Both are covered in this article. And I'm actually going to take you over to it for just a moment so I can show you. This is an open access article, which is always nice to have. So you don't have to have a subscription or anything to be able to access this article. And there's a section of the article, obviously, read the whole thing. But there's a nice section of this article here where they go into some of the intervention characteristics that they found from the study. So you're seeing those here on your screen. I actually shared this finding with you, I don't know, probably about a year ago, but worth revisiting just this really important point here that effect sizes tended to be higher with higher dosage. That's not a big surprise. That's pretty typical. But also when spelling was part of the intervention. So if there was a spelling instructional component, in addition to the phonics instruction, decoding instruction, that actually tended to contribute to more effective intervention for children with dyslexia. So that's something I really want to make sure I drew to your attention. You can see the differences listed right here. And the other thing that I wanted to share with you, so they found that having a phonemic awareness component to the intervention didn't make it any more likely to be effective, but in statistical terms, although it was a trend, but a very likely aspect of that is that if you're doing phonics instruction right, there's phonemic awareness already in it, if that makes sense. So that's probably what's going on there. It did say interventions that provided morphology or vocabulary instruction as well as word reading instruction yielded very similar effects to word reading interventions alone, and that might seem to you to be a surprising finding. And I found it surprising as well the first time I read this article. I think it has to do with the outcome measures that are being used here. So I suspect if they had outcome measures that were more sensitive to morphology or vocabulary, they might have found something different, but it certainly points to the idea that just morphology and vocabulary instruction is not going to be adequate to address the needs of children with dyslexia, which hopefully, or at risk for dyslexia, which I hope that we would all realize, but just an underscore. Interventions that were explicitly described as multisensory didn't differ from interventions that weren't. That is, the addition of being described as multisensory didn't make any difference in the impact. And group size did not moderate intervention effects, which is interesting. So for example, one-on-one or two-on-one, three-on-one didn't come out as effective or as making a difference in this particular study. So you can read more, but it just gives you a sense of what one really well conducted review tells us. And again, the article is open access, so it means you can access it even if you don't have a subscription and MAISA can't get it for you or the like. Okay. All right, the next question is here. I'm going to give you a chance to read it, please. So the question is, why are we finding that kids are actually encoding or spelling words better than they're decoding or reading words? So this is an awkward question for me because those of you who've heard me speak for a while know that generally what I'm trying to do is emphasize how related reading and writing are and how important it is that we teach both in our daily schedule and don't neglect writing and so forth. And as you just saw in that meta-analysis and systematic review, reading and spelling words have lots in common, relying on both, for example, relying on phonemic awareness skill, relying on concepts of print, particularly directionality and alphabetic principle, and relying on graphophonemic knowledge or knowledge of the relationships between, roughly speaking, sounds and letters, or more technically, graphemes and phonemes. But all that said, I think we all know that there are differences as well between spelling a word and reading a word, and those differences explain why children may have more difficulty with one or the other. So I made this little quick table here. Again, I know none of this is as polished as it would be, but that's the tradition in these Q&As. So when we're talking here, just for parsimony, on early reading and spelling before kids are reading words in chunks and so forth. And so if you look at reading words, you know, and you think about what's going on there, well, the first thing that happens is the kid has to recognize the grapheme, right? So they has to like see the letter S and know, oh, you know, I recognize that shape like this, right? And then they have to associate the grapheme with a phoneme. And some kids are going to do that by thinking S, S, or even S, sock, S, or whatever the keyword is. I'm just using sock here, right? Some kids will go directly from seeing that shape to S. Okay. And then once they've done that for a series of graphemes, then they're going to blend those sounds together. So if the word is sun, they're going to go sun, which is phonemic blending. Or if you're working with kids on the blend as you go or slide as you go, then it would be like sa, n, sa, n. So either way, the point is you've got phonemic blending there, right? When we're spelling words, the first thing that happens is we segment the sounds in a word, phonemic segmentation, right? So our phonemic awareness skill comes in first here, whereas it comes in last here. And we're then going to associate the first phoneme that we've segmented with a grapheme. Again, and it might be or it might be that they're going straight from S to writing the S, but there's that association there. And then they're going to write the grapheme. So even though phonemic awareness and letter sound knowledge, or of the skills, blending here versus segmenting here, and the order of the skills is different. And so you can understand why some children may have an easier time with one of these than another. So for example, if it's often the case, as the question implies, that kids are a little bit ahead in the reading of words. And that might be because, for example, phonemic blending is considered a somewhat easier skill than phonemic segmentation. But for various reasons, including the instructional environment. If kids have had a lot more practice with the segmentation than with the blending, which happens in some programs, then they may actually come out ahead in encoding. So I would say that the important thing to understand here is that we don't need to, stress out about unevenness between the two as much as we need to make sure that both are making progress, reading and spelling, and that we're taking advantage of the interrelationships between the two by teaching word reading and word spelling together, as indicated in that previous meta-analysis. Okay. So I'm going to give you a little interaction opportunity moment here, but this question is, I'm wondering about using grade level text with scaffolding to support fluency and vocabulary development for all students, even struggling readers. Also wondered about using above level text for interactive read alouds. Thank you. Okay, so let's start with just that term grade level text, which I think can cause a little confusion sometimes. So grade level text for read aloud is more complex than grade level text for children to read in a highly scaffolded opportunity like dyad or choral reading, which in turn would be more complex than the text that children are reading all by themselves. So what's grade level depends on the task. So it's not that you would say a read aloud should be an above grade level text. There's the grade level for a read aloud text, the sophistication, the complexity should be higher. In other words, a text that you read aloud at a particular grade level should be harder than what children would read themselves at that grade level. So the term grade level, just keep in mind what constitute grade level does depend on the task to some degree. But to get to the question about providing scaffolding, we have literally been saying to this network since 2016. So this is a long-standing position that we've all, those of us who've been in the network a long time have held, is that what we want to do is focus mainly on adjusting the scaffolding rather than the text. So it's not that we give children who are struggling or who maybe aren't at the same point as their classmates. It's not that we give them easier text. It's that we provide more scaffolding for them to be able to access grade level text. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a few minutes to just put in the chat some of the things have heard in the past can be scaffolds. So what could help children to access a grade level text that they might not be able to read on their own if you just handed it to them? So that's your task in the chat. And while you're doing that, I'm going to play music from 2016 so we can walk down memory lane musically as well. So go ahead and place that in the chat and I will reshare with some music. Okay.
I got this feeling inside my bones. It goes electric wavy when I turn it on. Off from my city, off from my home. We're flying up, no ceiling when we in our zone. I got that sunshine in my pocket, got that good soul in my feet. I feel that hot blood in my body when it drops. Ooh, I can't take my eyes off of it, moving so phenomenally. You're more like the way we rock it, so don't stop. And under the lights when everything goes, nowhere to hide when I'm getting you close. When we move, well, you already know.
If you haven't, please scroll through the chat. your colleagues' ideas.
Nothing I can see but you when you dance, dance, dance. Feel a good, good creeping up on you. So just dance, dance, dance. Come on. All those things I shouldn't do, but you dance, dance, dance. And ain't nobody leaving soon, so keep dancing. I can't stop the feeling. So just dance, dance, dance. I can't stop the feeling. So just dance, dance, dance.
Well done in the chat. You all had many, many research supported ideas about how to really scaffold children's access to grade level text. I did want to flag one piece in particular that did come up in the chat, but is worthy maybe of a little bit more comment, which is just, you know, building that background and vocabulary knowledge to enable children to bring more background knowledge to the reading of the grade level text. We can do that using texts that children read ahead of the challenging text that kind of slowly build up the background knowledge. That's one of the wonderful things that text sets do for us, is they build and build upon background knowledge. So that's where one of the places text sets comes in. But also there's the opportunity for kids to listen to, you know, read alouds that build that background knowledge, as well as to have firsthand experiences in social studies and science that can build some background knowledge they can then bring to the reading. So that's an important one. I just want to flag a little bit for you. All right, the next question, you made me work on this one a little bit. Well, all of them, I guess, but this one in particular, what research supports choral reading as a literacy best practice in the classroom? Okay. So there are a lot of international studies on choral reading. A number of them are children choral reading in a language that is not their heritage or home language. Some are in their heritage or home language. A lot of studies internationally. And for the purposes of answering this particular question, I'm not going to focus on those because there are differences in instructional context and instructional history that may make it a little bit difficult to transfer those findings. And then there are a number of studies with older children beyond my age group of expertise, looking at the impact of choral reading. Here's one that was published by a journal that's based right here in Michigan. So you can read this study by a researcher who's done considerable amount of work in fluency research. And you can see positive effects. If I'm remembering correctly, it was 6th graders where they showed positive effects over a control group in the experience of choral reading. But at our grade levels that we focus on, or I focus on here, K2, K3, I wasn't able to find any studies, which is something some of you have heard me say before, for choral reading back when we first listed it in the essentials. That it seems to still be the case that there aren't any studies that test it all by itself with this age group, unlike with older kids. What you do find are approaches that use choral reading as one of their one of the instructional practices that they're testing as a cluster. So one that's appropriate for design for tier 1 instruction that you've heard us talk about before. I think this is in the essentials modules as well. Fluency oriented reading instruction and wide fluency oriented reading instruction. So this is the work of Melanie Kuhn and Steve Stahl and colleagues. And in this particular study that I have listed here, they did look at fluency-oriented reading instruction with 2nd grade students, and that is a common age group that this technique is used with. In fact, the original research is also with 2nd graders. And in this approach, I'm vastly oversimplifying, but just to give you a sense, in this approach, the first day that the teacher reads, the children follow along, and there's a real focus on comprehending the text. Day 2 has echo reading of the text along with activities related to the text, such as writing, and the opportunity to read the text at home. Sorry for the lack of a comma there. Day 3 is choral reading. So here's where choral reading fits into this broader spectrum. Day 4 is partner reading of the text. And then day 5, they do a number of activities related to the text or passage that they've been working with. So what we see in this research is that 4E is effective at improving children's fluency, and in other studies, fluency and comprehension. And choral reading is a part of it, but it's not being tested just all by itself, if that makes sense. And just to sum up, there are 4 to 7 times that kids would be reading a passage in that approach. And then I did pull something for tier 2 as well. So this is a study that is looking at first graders and a tier 2 intervention for first graders that also included choral reading, again, not by itself, but as part of a cluster of experiences. So I'm showing you this. Sorry, this isn't the entirety of the intervention. This is like one part of it, one 10-minute part of it, but you can see they're reintroducing a storybook. Duet story here it means a story where the teacher is reading some of it and the children are reading some of it. You can see there's some vocabulary instruction here, but then we get down to the choral reading. And it says solo story. That's confusing because you might think, well, wait a minute, solo story. How are we choral reading something alone? Solo story just refers to the fact that the teacher is not reading part of the story. The it's written entirely for the children to read. So anyway, that's all that means. But they do a little vocabulary work again, and then they choral read. And the way that they do it is choral reading is the first thing that they do, and then the next time they're reading it on their own. So those are some examples of why we think choral reading is a research-supported instructional technique. Okay, I put 2 questions together here. What does research say are the most effective types of independent practice for K2 students to engage in while the teacher is working with targeted small groups? And I paired that question with this question: what should or could writing independent stations or centers look like at each grade level in K, first and second? And then it says, I know that it's not best practice for students to practice letter formation in an independent station. Okay, so I put those together because they're both about like what kids can be doing when the teacher is working with a small group. Okay, so the first thing I should say, just to make sure we're on the same page about this, is I don't know of research that would say like we need to have a set of writing stations at one point in the day and a set of reading stations in another part of the day. I don't know of research to suggest we should or shouldn't do that. So I just didn't want anyone to take from the question like, oh no, I have to design writing centers. We don't know. In my own work, and I think in a number of approaches, there's reading and writing happening in sort of the same set of, center stations, rotations, whatever you want to call them. Okay. And then I wanted to bring in the literacy essentials. This is the the revised literacy essentials. We added this by popular demand. This little passage here, please go ahead and read it. So what we said here is that we kind of gave a list of some of the things that children can do when the teacher is working with small groups. And the particular things we chose here are, big surprise, things that have research support. So writing is one, and to address the question that was posed, the second of the two, the writing can look in a variety of ways. So writing in response to reading is for sure one. So, if children have read a story, they might write a letter about the story to a relative to tell them about the story, for example. That would be writing in response to reading. Or they might take a stand on an issue that's been raised in the reading, that kind of thing. And then writing in alignment to content area instruction would be like, you know, for example, if children are growing plants, they might actually go over to the station where the plants are, and their task might be to draw, you know, do a scientific drawing of where the plant is in its growth cycle at this point in time, and then write notes about it. So those would be two examples of what you might see there. And then we also included repeated reading, dyad reading, brief handwriting practice, research-proven computer adaptive literacy programs, meaning ones that have been tested in research and shown to be effective, and then listening to and reading along with recorded books. Now on the brief handwriting practice, so in the response, here it says, I know that it's not best practice for students to practice letter formation in an independent station. I don't know that to not be best practice, so I'm not sure what research that is, and whoever wrote the question, if you have a chance to email me, that'd be awesome. So research on handwriting generally does have an opportunity for children to practice handwriting, and they don't have to have the teacher right there during that time. Handwriting instruction needs to be with the teacher for sure. And there need to be opportunities for the teacher to provide feedback on the handwriting. So obviously there needs to be that guided practice opportunity, but children can also practice independently. There are some key features of that, which I think I've talked about in a Q&A not too long ago, like about having a model letter on the left and the right so that left-handers are not disadvantaged. And there's many other characteristics of effective handwriting instruction, but I don't know of research to say that you can't have children doing it at an independent station. So there's research on that, I just don't know it. So that's why that is included as one of the items as well. Okay. So there are other things that we didn't list in the essentials that we could also list for certain grade levels, because we have research support for certain grade levels. Literacy enriched sociodramatic play is something that is a activity that children can do without the teacher that is associated with literacy growth. There are certain games, kind of phonics oriented, spelling oriented games that have been shown to support development. Readers theater, I think many of you know, has a fair bit of research support. And so like kids rehearsing for readers theater, doing that, or like further practice with readers theater would be acceptable. Couldn't be all of the readers theater, like some of it needs to be with the teacher, but some of it can be in small groups. So there's some other things there. And then there's some things we didn't list and they're worth saying again. Reading the room, don't know of research support on that. Rainbow writing, that has been tested in research multiple times and shown to be ineffective compared to everything it's been compared to. So we shouldn't be seeing rainbow writing. Worksheets in general don't have much research support. So generally speaking, worksheets and any sort of like drop everything and read style of just kids reading, grabbing a book and reading whatever they want with no, scaffolding or teacher involvement would be a problem. See Essential 8 for detail on that. One thing I do want to say, just because of some stuff I was with some districts we're working with in Oregon, maybe this is not happening in Michigan, but is just like what we don't mean here is just pick one of them. So like what we wouldn't do is have kids just listen to and read along with books on Epic for 45 minutes, right? Like the idea is that, a sum of a lot of things, not just one thing for a whole really long time. Hopefully that's clear. Okay. Rolling right along. Sorry, it's just like talking at you. That's the Q&A style, I'm afraid. Okay, this one says, what strategies do you have for supporting active self-regulation in students? And the reason I wanted to put this question after the previous question is because one of the things that happens actually when children have the opportunity to work alone and with one another without the teacher right there, dictating their and monitoring their activity, directly or quite presently, is that it can help to foster self-regulation in students. But I think this question is probably, I'm not for sure, but probably is building off of this part of the active view of reading. Here's the original citation. This is a research study that we conducted following the publication of the study led by school psychology professor Matt Burns. And here's the active self-regulation bubble. So you see three things here. So how do you support motivation and engagement? We've captured some of that research in Essential 1. So that would be a good place to look. And also, this is a very nice meta-analysis, actually, on different ways that we know we can foster children's motivation and engagement. In terms of executive function skills, one executive function skill that has good support in research is teaching kids goal setting and engaging kids in goal setting. So that would be one for sure, one area you could look at in this particular area. Another is planning. So for example, when kids are planning writing, that's really good for kids' active self-regulation. And in fact, in the active view of writing, which I'm working on with Professor Steve Graham, we do, really call out explicitly planning and goal setting as important executive function strengthening moves that we need to make in literacy. And then strategy use is in the way we put it in the model, it incorporates different kinds of strategy use, could be vocabulary strategies, word reading strategies, any kind of comprehension strategies. And I think you all are pretty familiar with how to teach those as well. And those would fall broadly under active self-regulation. Okay. This is a long question. This one is two slides long. So I'm going to not read it to you, but invite you to please read it. And I'll advance the slide in a moment. Okay, and here's the rest of it. Okay. Terrific question. Let's go into a few things. The first is I'm not sure why comprehension was in quotation marks in the question, but I just want to make sure that, we're all on the same page, that comprehension is is definitely a real thing and it matters and it's not automatic given strong fluency. So about a third of kids do not pass, at least based on a study in North Carolina, about a third of kids who don't pass their state's test actually pass all the benchmarks in word reading and in fluency. So they have a challenge with comprehension, but it's not because of other areas. So just making sure that we all agree that comprehension is, an important focus and is not automatic. You absolutely need good fluency for comprehension, but it's a necessary but not sufficient condition, as you've heard Tanya Wright and I say many a time. Okay, but comprehension is super hard to measure. Like that's the problem, right? It's so much easier to measure phonemic awareness and word reading and spelling, and that really puts us at a huge disadvantage when it comes to both knowing where children are in their comprehension development and in terms of being able to monitor their progress as we work on comprehension. But we don't have nothing, or put another way, we have some comprehension measures, always, limited in some ways, but I thought I'd pull out a few for your attention. So one is Cubed has a narrative comprehension measure. This is one we lifted up in our free and very low cost assessments document a number of years ago for MDE, or that we submitted to MDE. So this is one to look at for sure for narrative. For informational text comprehension, I have an assessment. It is that colleagues and I developed. It takes quite a while, so it wouldn't be something you do with every kid, but for kids where you might have concerns, what we showed in a research study that was published that I put a link to here, is that teachers who administered this assessment in their classroom over the course of the year, I think it was 3 times over the course of the year, had children who made stronger growth in reading comprehension than teachers who were randomly assigned not to administer the assessment. In other words, the administering of this comprehension assessment apparently led the teachers to work more on informational comprehension, which apparently led to children's growth in comprehension. And then there are general assessments of comprehension that aren't sort of specific to narrative or information. I put these in because of the way the particular standards called out in the question. So one place you can look, probably a lot of you have been there before, is this link here, which again, when you get the slides, you'll have the link, but this is, let's see if I can, so this is the, like landing page of the progress monitoring chart for tools from the National Center on Intensive Intervention. Here is kind of what you get if you start to dig into the table. And what you can do is you can search comprehension and see what comes up. So for example, here's the TRC, that's a comprehension measure. You can look at reliability and validity and whether there's been a bias analysis conducted. So, I mean, this goes on quite a ways, but and not all of these assessments are comprehension for sure, but there are comprehension assessments in here as well. So that is another source of, that's another source of information when you're looking for comprehension measures. But do know, I think the field realizes, like many scholars and companies and others, like we realize that, we need more and better comprehension assessment, and we're trying to figure it out. But again, it is just incredibly hard to measure, and for all the reasons that you've learned. So for example, if a kid happens to know a lot about skateboarding and you give them a passage on skateboarding, their comprehension is going to look a lot better than if you give a kid who doesn't know a lot about skateboarding a passage about skateboarding. And so like there's all this sort of noise in the data that makes it really hard. Comprehension isn't just like one skill, or it's not just like this one unitary construct. Okay, sorry, I'm having a little trouble finding where I was. There, right? Yes, okay. Sorry about that. The next question is there any value in tapping charts with sounds in them? It says, some of the schools I work with like to tap a chart with letters and say sounds and the picture name that correspond to it. In my experience, some kids are memorizing the sounds but unable to apply it in actual text. I don't see a lot of value in this, but was wondering if there's any reason to support continuing this practice. And there was another question. Is there any benefit to tapping charts with the letters and repeatedly saying the sounds and letters make? In my district, the EL department has pushed this as a resource and many are using this tool. I do not see any benefit of it, but I want to know your opinion. So I put those two together for obvious reasons. And I'm just going to be very vulnerable with you all. I didn't know what tapping chart meant, so I did have to Google that. And I was able to ascertain that it means something that it means a tool that I use in my own work and that many curricula use, but I had never heard of it referred to as tapping chart before. Okay, so let's back up here. So paired associate learning, which is when there's lots of forms of paired associate learning, but the most relevant here is like when you learn that S is for sock, or you associate the letter S and the sound with a sock, making those paired associations. That has great research support. And actually, Teresa Roberts' studies over the last few years on alphabet learning have only reaffirmed the value of paired associate learning. So that is definitely helpful. So in these charts that have, a picture of a sock and the letter S, written over it, that there is research, support for having those kinds of paired associations. And handheld alphabet charts, so the chart where you have A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever, and you may have other graphemes besides the alphabet, like SH or TH or CH, whatever. Those are part of some effective approaches, meaning approaches that have been shown to be effective in research. But I'm not aware of research to support going through them in alphabetical order, tapping each one and saying the sound or sounds. So if there's studies on that, I haven't read them or I'm not remembering them, and I would need somebody to send them to me. So like going A, apple, B, ball, seek, cat, etc. Like having kids do that over and over again. I'm not aware of research on that. What I would say is that in my sort of synthesis in my brain of effective approaches to developing kids' memory for the relationship between specific sounds and letters, or sounds and letters and keywords, generally they tend to vary the retrieval practice more. Retrieval practice, lots of support for research. So just meaning like the practice of kind of retrieving in your mind what that association is, they tend to vary the retrieval practice more. So it might be more likely that they might say, okay, you know, the word is sun. Look on your chart and tell your partner point to the part of your chart that point to the part of your chart that shows the letter at the beginning of sun, or tell your partner which part of your chart shows the word or letter that goes with the word sun. Like that kind of thing where you're like, kids are having to think more. So it's not like automatically just immediately going through, but like they're thinking more and having to like go not in alphabetical order. And there might be different approaches. So, you know, different things that you're having them retrieve. So sometimes it's like, okay, use your chart to identify the sound that goes with the letter M. So then kids go find the letter M, and then they see maybe there's, you know, a moon, and then they say, like that kind of more varied retrieval practice is more typical of what I see in studies that have tested approaches to instruction and found them to be effective. So this brings me to sort of a broader point that I want to make sure to make, which is just that in general, just a reminder that it's just safest to use research tested materials when they're available, and research tested practices, and to use researcher developed resources or resources that at least researchers have had some, you know, influence on. That's usually the safest thing to do to ensure research alignment of what you're doing. Okay, last question that I'm going to address today. It says many teachers are overwhelmed right now by the state of education. How might we support moving teachers forward with instructional practices while honoring that their plates are full? As with all the questions today, I really appreciate the question, and I read into this question a lot of empathy for teachers, which I appreciate hearing from coaches. So thank you for that. So first of all, I don't have any easy answers to this question. You know, I feel like this question goes beyond research in a lot of ways. This is a really great question, but you know, it doesn't have an easy answer. I will say that when we look at the research on teacher retention, so that is how do we, or what practices are associated with teachers being less likely to leave the classroom, which I guess is the ultimate case of teachers feeling, you know, that their plates are too full or not satisfying. One of the things we do see in that literature is that mentorship generally does have a positive influence on teacher retention. So the opportunity to be mentored. So if you have good mentorship and good collegiality kinds of practices in your schools, that's going to be helpful. This is a finding from 2018, but worth just bringing up again here. Presence of a curricular coach was associated with a substantial reduction in early career teacher turnover. So this means having somebody who's a coach who works with you in a curriculum specific way, which I know many of you do, is something that actually can reduce teacher turnover as well. So put another way, you as coaches are part of the answer to this question of how do we help move forward, teachers forward with instructional practices while honoring that their plates are hopefully them from actually not, wanting to teach anymore. Oh, sorry. And I think in general, we could say that professional learning that feels like it helps you teach better, which means improves your teacher efficacy or teacher self-efficacy, is likely to help. Whereas professional learning, and I think you already heard this again this morning, or maybe this afternoon, you have a session this afternoon where you're going to hear this in great depth. But just as a reminder, like this one-off professional learning, or this one-time professional learning, or anytime you're feeling like the professional learning is just not actually going to make your practice any better, it's like a compliance exercise or just something you have to do, that's probably going to make things worse for teachers. Whereas efficacious professional learning, or professional learning that really makes a difference in practice, is likely to make teachers feel less overburdened, because everybody wants to be effective. So a couple of little quick things here. I actually already have this up. Here's just like a quick reminder. I think I've shown this before maybe, and it's linked, but a quick reminder of professional learning that does and doesn't work. So you can, let me just put this on the screen and let you do some reading. I'm going to just scroll down a little bit so you can finish up. Okay. So, if you reread this document as I did last night with this question in mind, you kind of can see how the characteristics of effective professional learning are also things that are likely to help fill teachers' buckets, right? Like that opportunity to, engage collaboratively with your colleagues and to have professional learning occur over an extended period of time and not, just feel like an abrupt one and done. So anyway, that's one document I wanted to just bring to your attention. And then if you follow me on Twitter, now known as X, or Facebook, you may have seen this over the weekend. But it's a study. Again, I put a link here so you can link to it if you want. But it's a study in which the researchers looked at 104 studies of professional development. And what they found was that, well, as you probably know, a lot of professional development doesn't work. But professional development that was most likely to work, or works most, I guess, had at least one element of each of these four constructs: instilling insight, motivation, change, what they're learning. Researchers was really cool in like showing what happens if you only have some of these components, like what's likely to happen for teachers. And so you can see that most likely to be effective is one that has each of these elements. So I know that, in this coaching network, you work really, really hard to make sure that the professional learning that you help to lead is, has these characteristics and is effective. And I do believe that leading effective professional learning for teachers is one of the ways that we can help them to not feel like their plates are so full in a bad way, at least, or that their plates are full in a productive way, if that makes sense. Okay. If I do say so myself, I timed that exactly perfectly. Did you see that? It's exactly 11:15. And I got through exactly all my slides and exactly all the questions.
And it was
mean-
wonderful. Oh. And it was wonderful and it was informative and it gave us lots to think about. I know you were busy sharing, but you know, in the backside on the Slido, we were getting some questions like, can we see this? Can we have these links? And we're taking all of those slides. We're going to put them in to the agenda as well as those links that you were starting to ask for. So you will find those all linked in an agenda. And now we are so grateful for you coming and spending this time with us. Much appreciation and much love your way. We will have, Liberty has started a project in taking those previous Q&As that you have done with the group and putting them in a fashion that's going to be easy to access and find the questions to some of those past ones as well. So just know as a network that we're working to get that together. So thank you so much. And for all of us here, we do have a new Slido up. So if you can take a look, we would like to know, we have 2 questions around the learning with Nell today. The first is, what stood out to you from today's learning? And the second one will be, what additional clarification might be needed based on the questions and answers that we heard today?
And many of you had some things you added to the chat. If you want to stick them in the Slido, we will make sure they are revisited. And thank you so much, Nell. It was great to see you and hear from you.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Got to run to my next meeting, but good to see you all and appreciate your time and attention. Bye-bye. Thank you. Thanks, leadership.